is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Andrew, it's crypto week in America. At least that's what they're saying on Twitter. We're seeing a couple of big bills being discussed and perhaps even voted on the floor, and some other announcements out of the government talking about how the U.S. is turning a page on crypto and how it wants to become the leader. With the passing of all these laws, we're probably going to see some much greater institutional and enterprise adoption of blockchains. I think until recently, only the most kind of cutting edge, forward-thinking firms have leaned into this technology. And one of the reasons for that is in the absence of clear regulations, a lot of businesses are kind of reluctant to invest. You don't want to end up putting money to work on a new business plan that uses crypto or blockchain, and then to find out, a year or two later that you've run afoul of the law or the regulations in some way. So I think that this kind of clarity is going to help to accelerate adoption really across the board, but especially in the enterprise and in the banking world. And that creates some really interesting challenges and opportunities. One of them is if big banks and institutions are going to be using these open public networks, how do they know what who they're dealing with, the provenance of assets, the nature of transactions, and how do they analyze and vet all this data that's flowing across these 50 different, blockchain networks where trillions of dollars of flows are happening? Well, one of the ways they do that is with the help of firms like Elliptic. And we're very lucky today to actually be speaking with the co-founder and CEO of Elliptic, James Smith. So Elliptic, founded in 2013, has really pioneered the use of blockchain analytics for financial crime compliance. It's one of the most comprehensive blockchain data and intelligence platforms for crypto compliance and forensic investigations. It's used already by many of the biggest crypto native firms like Coinbase, Binance, BitGet. In fact, apparently 66% of all crypto volume runs through exchanges that are already using Elliptic. And they have over 700 customers across 30 different countries, cumulatively have labeled over $900 trillion of flows across the major blockchain networks. James himself is a PhD in computer science from Oxford, where he specializes in AI and language models and brings over 12 years of pioneering experience in blockchain technology to this very important space. So, James, we're really excited to be talking to you today. You guys have built a real reputation for yourself in this space as the kind of go-to firm for major crypto companies. And now, as I said in my introduction, we're seeing this technology really hitting the mainstream. So nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come and a business whose time has come. And I think that might be true for Elliptic. So just want to say thank you for joining the show. Welcome to DeFi Decoded.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
Yeah. So tell us about the founding of Elliptic. Like, I was giving this big wind up about where things are at today, but in 2013, the crypto world was very different. I remember at the time, this is almost before the word blockchain entered the vernacular. It was just Bitcoin, really. I know Ripple and a couple of these other things, but it was before even the Ethereum ICO and token launch. So, what was the genesis of the business at the time when you launched Elliptic in 2013?
Yeah, you're right. It was very different back then. So I was working in financial services as a market maker and interest rate options. And one of my friends, now my co-founders, had told me about Bitcoin back in 2011. And I had, to my detriment, ignored him for a couple of years. And I remember seeing on CNBC that the price of Bitcoin had gone from $10 to $30 or something in early 2013. So it caught my attention. Got back in touch with Tom, started talking about this. When we go to, if you went to a meetup in London where we're headquartered, or elsewhere in the world, it was very, the people that would be at those were a very different complexion to what you'll see in the market today. It was pretty anarchist, or at least incredibly libertarian, and a lot of sort of this is going to replace the existing financial system. And we didn't quite see it that way as a replacement so much as an enhancement. We thought that for this to be successful, there needed to be uh, connection between the existing financial system and the new one that we were building. There needed to be a lot of the infrastructure that we saw coming from traditional finance, and that needed to exist in this new world too. So we jumped into this thinking, like, what do we need to build? What infrastructure needs to be built in order to help realize this new financial system that we think is going to be cheaper and faster and more accessible, and hopefully improve the lives of many around the world. So we, like many startups, started building one thing, realized it wasn't the right thing, pivoted to another thing. But within about a year, we realized from talking to the leaders at the few other Western crypto firms that were around at the time, the likes of Bitstamp and Coinbase and Circle and so on, that they were starting to get questions from, particularly in the US, from regulators and law enforcement. FinCEN had put out some guidance in March 2013, basically saying that companies needed to comply with anti-money laundering regulation. And so we went and figured out what that was. We were, as founders, 3 data nerds, and we saw this as a data problem because you got these, you had this one open ledger that everyone could read, and if you could organize that into sensible ways, then you could probably reason about where the money had come from and where the money was going. And so we managed to solve this problem for a few exchanges early on, like Coinbase, and that was the beginning of our journey that has led us to where we are today, 12 years later.
So what was it like? I mean, Bitcoin is one ledger, but then you were able to scale as these new blockchains launched, and also as like new kinds of applications launched, right? Like DeFi, for example, appearing on Ethereum for the first time in 2020. How did that sort of change the nature of the business? Was it just a matter of scaling linearly, or did you have to like change how you did things in order to be able to solve for the problem of new blockchains, new applications, and so forth?
We've been through a lot of iterations. I think to start with, we just replicated, right? We had Bitcoin, and we're like, let's make a new one for Ether, and then let's make a new one for Ripple, and so on. A few years ago, and it was probably around the time of whenever DeFi summer was, and sort of 4 or 5 years ago, I don't know how many chains we were on at the time, but we took a step back and said, actually, this isn't about Bitcoin risk and Ether risk and XRP risk and so on. Actually, this is just a bunch of individuals and companies interacting with each other. And I actually don't care most people don't care whether it was Bitcoin that moved or Ether that moved. They care about that financial relationship. And so we said, how can we re-architecture this whole thing to actually be able to take data from any chain, and build it all into one big connected picture, so that you could then reason in a more holistic way about an actor, whether who had they interacted with, what kind of patterns of money movement were they going through. So we took an early view that this was going to scale to many, many chains and many interactions between those chains. And we totally rebuilt the platform. Our focus from day one has always been on financial institutions. Our belief was that ultimately it's going to be the financial institutions, not the government organizations, that drive the growth of this industry. And so we were trying to build something that enabled those financial institutions to see connections, whether they were on the same chain or different chains. We sort of mentioned this before, there were really were any bridges from chain to chain. But what we've ultimately built is something where we can now just put in one chain after another very, very quickly. We support, I think it's the latest count, something like 55 different chains and over 300 different bridging pairs, and all sorts of ways for money to move around this ecosystem, to go through dexes, etc. Because ultimately, if you're trying to identify, let's say, intent then you need to be able to see through swaps and bridging events and follow the money as it moves from one chain to another. So what we're building, and what we're really proud of what we've accomplished, is that actually we've got the leading global platform across the digital assets overall, right? Like 55 chains is way more than anyone else can cover in this space, and so it just gives you way more visibility in terms of what different actors are doing, and helps you make better business decisions as a result.
Yeah. So I'll ask one more, and then I know Andrew wants to jump in here. So, one of the common critiques of crypto is that it's this like den of iniquity where all this crime is happening. But a lot of reporting from firms like Elliptic and Chainalysis and others reveals that actually like criminality is a comparatively small part of like the overall on-chain activity. And I've always kind of wondered about that, because it's probably true that the use of crypto to fund illegal activity is probably pretty low, but there's probably a lot of like tax evasion and illicit flows that you wouldn't associate. It's not like guns for hire or something, but it is something that if you're a financial institution, you're very sensitive to, right? You want to make sure that like whoever you're dealing with, like you can do the KYC and so forth. So can you also talk about like what is the like how much crime is actually happening on chain? Like, how does it break down? Is it bigger than people think, less than people think? Like, what's the latest based on your most recent sort of, reporting on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you raise an interesting point as like what do you define as criminal activity, right? There was a time when 40% of transactional activity on Bitcoin was to do with the Silk Road.
Which was the year you guys launched, right?
That was back when we were launching, yeah. And so the nature of transactions is very different today, right? Like a huge amount of transactional activity is people moving money from one exchange to another. They see people speculating on prices. So it's not the sort of more obviously criminal activity that it was back then. But it's hard to know when someone's moving money from one exchange to another whether they're trying to create a chain of money laundering. Of course, to be able to make those kind of determinations, you have to start pairing the on-chain insight that we bring with the customer insight that our clients will have. So what's really important in terms of the data and insight that we provide to people is that it's flexible, it's customizable. They're able to tune the risk parameters, to tune the data that they get from us based on what it is that what their business model is, what they expect of their customers, and then looking for patterns that are abnormal. So to satisfy anti-money laundering regulation, to completely oversimplify, and I'm not an expert, but you essentially need to build up a profile of what you think your customer should be doing, and then make sure that your customer continues to have a pattern that matches what your expectation was. And so you can see that requires both the knowledge that the firm has of the customer they're onboarding, and then our on-chain insight to help them understand whether it's matching that profile.
I think one of the coolest things I saw that you guys have put out on your blog, and just kind of like in this whole, I shouldn't say cool because that might have the wrong connotation, but one of the most interesting things was last month, the Iranian crypto exchange Nobitex was hacked for over $90 million by a pro-Israel group. And I think it was like the first time I've ever seen essentially like on-chain cyber warfare, like not including sort of, North Korea, which has been kind of like one of the biggest, obviously, like state actor, sort of industrial grade cyber attack. But do you want to just talk a little bit about that? Because you guys had a great blog post on this on June 18th talking about this. You guys identified over $90 million sent from Nobitex, which is essentially one of I think the largest crypto exchange in Iran. It was hacked by by like an Israel.
Sparrow.
Yeah. And it was $90 million. And then essentially they didn't actually have access to the private keys from what I understood. So they effectively just burnt the money as kind of like a way to, essentially harm Iran during their conflict. Yeah, just really curious to hear about this like new geopolitical front that seems to have opened up in the last month.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. So Nobitex was very likely, it has strong links to the IRGC and Iranian government. There's plenty of sort of open source investigations that have identified relatives of the Supreme Leader and other IRGC linked people to the exchange. It's it's perhaps not uncommon that sanctioned countries have been using crypto as a way to get money in and out. We've seen it in, as you say, DPRK. We can talk about for hours the involvement they've had in crypto, but there's a big Russian exchange called Garantex, which was used for plenty of sanctions evasion, and which we helped the US government take down. Nobitex was the equivalent for Iran, right? And so it was by far the biggest exchange operating in Iran. The types of actors were everything from retail through to government actors, and this Israeli linked group hacked it. What's particularly interesting is they could have actually moved that money to their own wallets, but they chose to move it to basically burn wallets. So they essentially had explicit names saying things about Iran as the address. So it's like a vanity wallet that you haven't actually got the private key for. So they essentially did burn that $90 million to hurt Iran. I think that's like a new way of doing it, perhaps. I think there is plenty of state activity going on crypto for various countries around the world, but either offensive or defensive, or just for like understanding what other actors are doing. There's quite a lot that's going on.
Yeah, sorry. The reason why I sort of ask it is that not talking about your business specifically, but it almost, to me, it kind of clicked in my mind that sort of chain tracing firms could almost make this leap from almost kind of like, a compliance layer to almost like defense tech in a way. If we start to have like geopolitical on-chain warfare, I guess I'm just kind of curious if that's kind of like a macro theme you guys think about yourself as like a real kind of, potentially growing market, or even just as like a thing that's going to become bigger and bigger, or is this kind of like a more of like a sort of one-off, I guess?
No, I don't think it's a one-off. Our platform and data is already trusted by governments as well as financial institutions. I think the biggest use of data like this will be financial institutions who are trying to make better decisions across their business, whether that's for compliance reasons or for market intelligence reasons or whatever else it might be. That's where we put the majority of our focus. But we do also make some of this data available to government institutions in certain countries where they are trying to use it to make sure that they are better understanding the threat landscape and their adversaries and so on.
So you deal with like different kinds of companies and institutions, right? Like, so Kraken and Coinbase are going to be more crypto native than, PayPal and MasterCard, who are going to be more crypto native than, JP Morgan. Like, I think like all the way up to, and it's not to disparage them, but to just say like, there are going to be some enterprises and banks that are going to be looking to Elliptic because they need to integrate stable coins or they need to do RWAs or something. Like it's an inevitability of the digitization of assets, and they may not know much or they're just learning. So like, what is the process like for you trying to onboard a noob institute? Like it could be $1 billion company or $100 billion company, but they may be a total neophyte when it comes to crypto. Like, what is that process actually like? Like, where do you start? How do you explain it? Do you view your role as being educator as well, of just like the systems? Like, just talk about that process, because I feel like that's going to be super relevant in the next year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's been relevant for our entire history. We've always thought that we needed to educate. Okay, right back at the beginning when we started offering products, Coinbase already had a compliance team and cared about it, but there weren't many exchanges who did, and we were telling people who needed to do compliance. And then we were educating the regulators. So we spent a lot of time educating regulators globally, helping helping them understand and then helping shape so that we make sure that regulation goes in sensible direction. But yeah, you're right. There are now large financial institutions, and especially in the US, with hopefully some of the regulation that's going to get passed this week, being on the horizon. The approach we've generally taken with businesses like that and found most successful is to start with the education, right? So depending on the organization, depending on who it is in the organization, depending on how where it's getting driven from in the organization, you might be starting at what is crypto, or you might be a little further along and talking about how do you take the principles that you understand from traditional financial compliance, anti-money laundering, sanctions compliance, and translate those into crypto? Right? How can you make sure that your existing framework is compatible with crypto, with digital assets more broadly? And so education is often the way that we help them get to a place where they get comfortable with saying, okay, we can offer products in this area, and then sort of lead from one step to the next at that point to hopefully us being the partner that they work with beyond that. I think though it's also important to, when you're building a program in one of these organizations, to recognize that education is not a thing you do once at the beginning. This industry that we work in changes so quickly that the education we give today needs to be different from a year from now, and people need to be trained and retrained as they build up a program.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, I have a separate line of questioning, which I'd love to get your point of view on. In your most recent report, you talked about the impact of, or the intersection of crypto and AI, and how AI enabled crime as this new sort of threat vector in the world, and it's not all crypto related. People are worried about AI, voice modulation and AI agents being able to scam people online and so forth. And I'm wondering, just like thinking about the intersection of crypto and AI, how does that, well, first of all, like, what is your point of view? Maybe just kind of expound on that topic a little bit more. Talk about like what is it? How does it create new challenges for the financial institutions and the businesses that you deal with? Is it different? Are you noticing on chain any differences because it's AI is the one doing this and using this technology? Can you just like unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different sort of pieces to that. So there is, I mean, as I'm sure you and most of your listeners will be familiar, like AI is accelerating and accelerating. Right? The amount, what's true today and what's true in 3 months is totally different things. So it gives you this ability to iterate very quickly, and that's as true for a bad actor as it is for a good actor. We have seen some experimentation on chain where there is sort of creation of agents who are sort of designed to go and take advantage of look for and take advantage of weaknesses in certain systems. But I think that has not yet become particularly dominant. I think the biggest area that we've seen AI-enabled crime so far would be in fairly traditional scams, romance scams, elderly scams, etc., where there are tools being used for, you mentioned voice modulation, face modulation, being writing emails. There's been some of the stuff we published recently has been about a couple of marketplaces. There was a Huawei guarantee and Jinvia guarantee, which is basically large scale scam groups running out of Southeast Asia. The amount of money that has gone through these things is huge, and they run. Yeah, it's pretty sad actually. There are victims on both sides, right? They're running compounds where people are essentially having to build these relationships with rich Westerners to build trust, and then to relieve them of their money. They use AI tools a lot in that. So the marketplaces that we've helped take down were exchanges where you could buy the voice modulation tools, buy the face modulation tools, buy the fake website, buy the some of the darker things like the weapons and whatever that they use to subdue the people who are in the compounds who are on the performing end of these scams. So I think AI is featuring heavily in that way. I think we will continue to see that. It probably enables that one scammer to do 10 scams at the same time and then 100 scams at the same time, just in the same way that it makes you 10 times as efficient as you were the day before yesterday, and hopefully another 10 times a few days in the future.
Yeah, interesting. When you say like help to shut them down, so you're working hand in glove or in partnership with law enforcement in that respect? Like who's or is it like the aggrieved parties who have been, who, I don't mean to laugh, who have suffered the damages as a result of these scams? Like, what is that process like?
Yeah, so with some of these, we're often the first people to uncover them, or uncover the scale of them, because we do primary research as part of building up the data set that we build our products on top of. So with the Huawei group, we were the first to expose that they had the scale of this marketplace that was for exchanging these tools, or to facilitate pig butchering and other online scams. We then will work with law enforcement, primarily in the US and UK, who are interested in doing something about these, right? So in these cases, it was sort of sharing addresses with the relevant law enforcement. Telegram actually, so a lot of these groups ran on Telegram, and Telegram actually eventually acted and went and shut down a bunch of these groups, which sort of cut them off. That doesn't mean the scammers give up and go home, right? So they pop up again and again and again. And so we continue to track these, and you can see money moving from one place to another. Following the money is generally the best way to track where criminals are going, because they can shut down a website and open up a new website very easily. But if you see that it was the same money that moved across, then that's really helpful for connecting them.
With kind of like one question that we always ask, which is like, where do you see, I guess, over the next 6 to 12 months, do you have any sort of specific, they don't have to necessarily be contrarian, but do you have a prediction of kind of like over the next 6 to 12 months? That's something that people aren't really sort of talking about enough. I guess, like, how do you think the crypto space is going to evolve from your, extremely unique vantage point that our listeners should really pay attention to?
I think it's maybe not at all contrarian to say that I think we're all pretty excited about what's going on with stablecoins. For me, this is the first real legitimate use of crypto. Okay, it's been good for gambling and it's been good for crime, but now it's actually being used in a big way for moving money around in a meaningful way, that is faster, cheaper, etc. Um, what you know, I think, yeah, to the name of the podcast, right? I think this starts to make DeFi start to become really interesting. Like what tools need to be built that actually enable that actually fix real problems, right? Like actually enable us to move money in the right currencies in the right places as quickly as possible. Um, what I think, sort of linking back to what we spend a lot of our time on is, the financial crime aspect is, in a decentralized world, who do you hold accountable? And I think ultimately you have to think about who is making money. Um, uh, it was really interesting in the Bybit hack, and frankly in many of the North Korean hacks. They typically, as a first step, very quickly move all of the tokens that they've taken. So in this case, it was a bunch of state ETH tokens predominantly, and go through dexes to turn them into Ether. Once it's in the native token, it's much harder you cannot censor it. And then they later would move it through bridges, which again, both dexes and bridges rely on liquidity to be provided. We're not yet seeing a lot of DeFi regulation, but I think it will be interesting for the companies who are coming in and starting to use stablecoins for payments to be thinking about, like, what protocols am I using? What are the rules eventually going to be around these different protocols? Who's providing liquidity, and am I comfortable that they've got the appropriate checks in place? Are they making sure that they're not enabling DPRK to come and launder a bunch of money? And so I think there's, once we get all of the right stablecoin regulation in place, I think there's probably going to then start to be a lot more thinking about how do we make sure that we're considering the whole chain of payments and making sure that we're building a safe stack all the way down.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to end it. You mentioned at the outset the first legitimate use case. I mean, it's funny to hear someone who's been in the crypto space for a decade basically say, like, only until in the last 2 years has there been anything that's come along that's truly useful.
Yeah.
And I think it depends on your point of view. I think DeFi was one of those things where it was proven out to be that it could work and that there was functionality there. Using decentralized exchanges for the exchange of assets, and that primitive and what it could mean for other assets, or lending pools and what that could mean for expanding collateralized lending to other sectors of the economy. So to me, it was kind of like a big proof point where it was really useful to a small coterie of crypto native types who were using that technology, and I think now with regulation, but also with the technology reaching prime time and some of these layer ones reaching scalability, I actually think that we can see the expansion of that into the real economy. But I think that one of the gating factors for that is, well, if you're going to have financial institutions, someone to blame, because you can't blame a protocol if it's truly decentralized, then like how are you going to cover their butts? I guess like how do they make sure what they're doing in this decentralized world is not running afoul of the law?
Yeah, completely agree. And I am very excited about DeFi, right? It just didn't have, when it came out and we built all these protocols, it was like, yeah, they're the right idea, but there's no one here to use them yet. And I think what stablecoins are doing is finally bringing in all of that mass liquidity that will make hopefully many of the things that have been built over the past 15 years useful, because many of them were great ideas, just needed some customers to come along. And I think stable coins are probably going to be the first major tap that is turned on that brings a lot more customers into the space.
Yeah, exactly. In one of your, just to wrap it up, in one of your recent reports, you said that 77% of financial institutions believe that digital assets are going to play an important role in their industry or in their business. And I've seen other reports from Coinbase talking about how more than half of all Fortune 100 companies think that Web3, they have a Web3 strategy or believe they will need one in the future, something like that. So that's a big percentage of companies that believe that this is going to be impactful and is going to make a difference. What percentage do you think, like, let's start with maybe just financial services companies. Like, what percentage of financial services companies do you think are actually doing anything in this space? And where do you think that, what do you think that looks like in a year's time if we get regulation and if we get some of these other milestones?
So it's interesting. We probably did that survey 6 months ago, and I bet that number would get even higher now.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, any firm that doesn't say that it's a career risk if you work in finance. So you don't think digital assets are important.
Yeah. What percentage do I think of doing something already? I mean, like every large bank is now looking at it. It's like the last 6 months has been, especially in the US, has just been so fast to change. Once that OCC guidance changed in January or February, whenever it was, suddenly everyone started coming out of the woodwork. And then, I think Circle IPO was great. And then as you start to see the Genius Act making good progress, and I think they're all little check marks along the way. I think every major institution in some form is now looking at it, either doing their early research or at the other end of the spectrum, about to release some products. Some of them are public about it, some of them are not. I think where there is still a lot more work to be done, and where it will take longer, is when you get down into the sort of small and medium-sized enterprises who are not going to be able to, you haven't got the resources to go and do that research, who are going to have to wait until there are some more ready-made products. And that's, I think, where there is a big opportunity for some of these sort of services firms who are coming in and taking early and big bets on crypto, like Stripe has been doing, and PayPal and various others. So I think there'll be a lot. I think, what do you say, a year from now? These are numbers out of the air, but that's probably 25% of, if you go by sort of assets are into it already in some form. And I think in a year from now we'll be getting closer to 50%.
Well, that'll be a pretty interesting environment for Elliptic, because that'll mean that there's going to be a lot of big businesses that need to get up the curve very, very quickly on what's going on. James, that was a great discussion. Thanks so much for joining us. Really great to hear about the past, present, and future of the business, and also your point of view on the market and the industry and what's coming next. Thanks for joining us. We'll have to have you back on in a year's time to see how your predictions stack up.
Of course we are. Thanks, Alex, and thanks, Andrew. It's been great to be here.
Yeah, great. All right, that's it for this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. Thanks for joining us for this terrific discussion. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and share the podcast wherever you get it. It helps other people find it. Until next week, that's it. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.